Last May, IndyCar released their 2021 engine regulations. The platform will remain fairly similar to what it is currently. The engines will remain V6s, though they will go up in capacity from 2.2 liters to 2.4. They will also, unfortunately, keep the same 12,000 RPM limit, so don't expect them to sound much better. That being said, both Chevrolet and Honda committed to these 2021 regulations, and the search for a third manufacturer has been ongoing for quite some time. IndyCar may have actually found their third manufacturer, though, and a fairly interesting point to this that has come out recently and has been reported by many sources in the know is that the brand interested in joining IndyCar in 2021 is of German heritage. So that narrows it down quite a bit. And in this video, we're going to talk about each of the major German car companies and exactly which ones are most likely to be entering IndyCar in 2021 for the 2021 regulations. So we'll start with one of the most obvious choices and one of the choices that has probably the most diverse range of brands to choose from, that being Volkswagen. Now, Volkswagen themselves haven't had a whole lot of open wheel experience. They have built engines for Formula 3 cars. I think they still do in some regional series around Germany. But Volkswagen themselves as a brand generally don't participate in a whole lot of motorsport endeavors. They leave it up to their subsidiary brands to do so. So even though there have been some rumors in the past of Volkswagen coming in as Volkswagen, it hasn't been for a very long time. In fact, the rumors that I remember most specifically were around the open wheel merger in 2007-2008 when Volkswagen was taking a pretty hard look at coming into IndyCar racing. It obviously didn't happen. And not to mention, and specifically why I'm talking about Volkswagen first, because I actually think they're the least likely of any of the German marques to come in because of the fact of a little incident called Dieselgate that happened a couple of years ago. So most of Volkswagen's extracurricular funding and most of their motorsports endeavors now kind of go to appeasing the green police, so to speak. You may notice that a lot of Volkswagen brands in particular, though virtually all these German brands, have become involved in Formula E. A lot of that has to do with not only appeasing the green police, trying to make up for their past misgivings, at least in the eyes of our all-knowing and all-powerful government officials, but also future-proofing their product and their brand for regulations that are coming down the pipeline, not only in the European Union, but also in Germany itself. That being said, let's talk about a few of Volkswagen's subsidiary brands, because Volkswagen is a little bit differently run as a company, at least in their motorsports endeavors. A lot of times their subsidiary brands that they own, will compete against each other, and Volkswagen doesn't have a problem with it. You may notice, like General Motors, for example. Now, in the past, like in NASCAR, they had Chevrolet battling Pontiac, and actually, you go further back, Buick. But in more recent years, if Chevrolet is racing in a series, you won't see a Cadillac, and vice versa. If Cadillac is participating in one series, Chevrolet will stay out of it. That's just generally how it's gone with General Motors. Not the same for Volkswagen. If there's an Audi competing, a lot of times you'll see a Porsche and a Lamborghini. They're all owned under the same umbrella corporation, I guess you could say. So we'll talk about, in alphabetical order, each of the subsidiary brands from Volkswagen and kind of their likelihood. First up is Audi. Obviously, major motorsports history with Audi. Multiple Le Mans victories, victories in the 12 Hours of Sebring, ALMS, World Endurance Championships, you name it. Not a whole lot of open wheel racing in Audi's portfolio. They obviously are involved in single-seater racing right now with Formula E, but it seems like that's kind of where all their eggs are in that basket. Specifically, I think, again, kind of appeasing the green police, they've been running diesel-powered race cars for the better part of the last 15 years. So for a motorsports endeavor, they have to kind of be very careful when they start investing lots of money into series that may not be perceived as green as something like Formula E. Audi has been rumored to have been interested in the past with IndyCar racing. Again, it was somewhere around that merger time frame, and as we've kind of gotten closer to the modern era, we haven't heard a lot about Audi. So I would say Audi is unlikely. We go down to the next subsidiary, Bentley. Bentley has an interesting motorsports history. Obviously, they were involved very heavily in Grand Prix racing, early Grand Prix racing. In fact, a Bentley won the first 24 hours of Le Mans. They've never, I don't think Bentley has ever actually entered an Indianapolis 500, despite having a lot of open wheel cars, especially in the pre-war era. That being said, I don't see this as particularly likely at all. Bentley is a very high-end brand, and even though IndyCar has gone much closer to a total business-to-business relationship style of moving product, I don't see Bentley as looking to gain a whole lot from entering IndyCar racing. I think it's too consumer based. I think they need to be, or they want to be looking in stuff like GT racing, especially GT3 racing, where not only are they competing for a very high class crowd, so to speak, but in reality, they're not only selling Bentleys on the showroom, but they're selling their GT3 cars to the kind of more adventurous billionaires, so to speak. We go down to Lamborghini. Lamborghini is very interesting, and a lot of people don't even know it's owned by Volkswagen, but it is. Lamborghini actually expressed interest in IndyCar racing about 2 years ago. They were actually interested in building their own car, full stop, for IndyCar racing. Of course, IndyCar in their infinite wisdom said, we like Dallara, you can't build your own car, and Lamborghini actually lost a lot of interest and started pursuing, I think, prototype racing, which they still haven't built a car for that either. So Lamborghini is a bit of a weird company. They're kind of wishy-washy. They are involved in GT racing, but I would not expect Lamborghini to show up. Porsche, that's an interesting one, and one that I unfortunately think is not going to happen. Of course, Porsche has some open wheel experience, specifically IndyCar experience. 1979, they nearly put the 935 motor in a Parnelli with Danny Ungaius, who would have been doing the driving. That didn't happen. They showed up again in 1987 through 1990 with Al Holbert's Porsche team. They didn't have a whole lot of success. They got one win with Teo Fabi in 1989. They've been rumored to be involved again, kind of that whole Volkswagen Audi thing around the merger with Champ Car and Indy Racing League. But again, they were kind of affected by Dieselgate. They were racing in the same series that Audi was, the World Endurance Championship, and of course, for Porsche is entering Formula E next year. So I think their single-seater, high-budget racing car thing is kind of taken care of at this point, and I don't think they would stand to gain a whole lot from IndyCar racing. Real quick, Seat. Don't think Seat would be interested. They are mainly a touring car company when they race, and again, they don't sell cars in the United States. Skoda, same thing. They're a rally car company. They're very niche, and they don't sell cars in the United States. So that takes care of all the Volkswagen brands, easy for me to say, brands. And then we go on to another company that is not owned by Volkswagen, but is a German company, but they don't sell cars in the United States, so it's just, I'm literally going to talk about this only because people in the comments would mention it if I didn't bring it up. Opel. Now, people will bring up Opel because at one point they were owned by General Motors, but in 2017 they were sold out or bought out from General Motors and became their own company. So GM, which of course owns Chevrolet, which is involved in IndyCar, has no affiliation with Opel anymore. So Opel coming in, it wouldn't happen because, again, they're German-based, they don't sell cars in the United States, and they're not associated with anything American anymore. So Opel would not come into the sport, despite they built some Formula 3 engines back in the 90s, but that's about the extent of their open wheel experience. Now we get into the very interesting ones, and the ones that I think are probably the most likely given the circumstances. Of these last two, this is the least likely one, Mercedes-Benz. Of course, Mercedes-Benz, we know, they race in Formula 1 and are very successful in Formula 1. They've scored, the last 4 or 5 championships. Lewis Hamilton, of course, is their star driver. Lewis Hamilton's one of the greatest in the world, and I'm sure some people would love to speculate about Mercedes coming over and possibly Lewis Hamilton doing the Indy 500 someday. I doubt that would happen. Lewis Hamilton, if he ever comes to the United States, will probably come to NASCAR. That's his own words. Mercedes is another German company that is entering Formula E and will be entering it, I think, next year along with Porsche. It might be 2 years from now. I can't remember. It's one of those two. So again, you're kind of seeing a lot of these German manufacturers really looking at the electric racing. I know everybody's going to bring that point up, but that there's really not as much of a fan base for Formula E as for something like IndyCar, at least not the potential for it. Certainly, there isn't an event with Formula E stature that would compare to the Indianapolis 500 in terms of impact. Of course, speaking of the Indianapolis 500, Mercedes has some success there. They won in 1915 and also 1994 with the 1,000 horsepower 209E Ilmor engine that everybody talks about, and it's fantastic. And you really should read Beast, the book. That's a fantastic story about that. Interestingly enough, despite all that success that Mercedes has had in IndyCar racing, they don't have a championship. They kind of came around right about the same time Honda did, and Honda really dominated Champ Car and kart racing at that particular moment in history. And Mercedes kind of fell off. They started focusing a lot more on F1, and eventually they left the sport around 2000. So would Mercedes be willing to come back? Possibly, but quite frankly, I think their United States marketing efforts are based mainly around football, if you can believe it. They sponsor, I think, 2 or 3 stadiums. I think they sponsor the stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, and as well in New Orleans. So I think that's where their United States marketing is. I don't think they're interested in U.S. motorsports per se. So that leaves us with one German manufacturer, and the one that I think is the one that is going to be an IndyCar manufacturer in 2021. That is Bavarian Motor Werks, aka BMW. And there's a lot of IndyCar connections, a lot more than after I thought about it than really I could believe. Now, a little bit of history on BMW, open wheel racing. Obviously, well, not so much open wheel racing, but they're in single-seater racing currently in Formula E, and obviously they've had some BMW has been involved in open wheel high-level racing with Formula One, both with the Brabham team and eventually Sauber, a few other teams scattered along there as well. But they've been out of this kind of high-level open-wheel racing since about 2009 when they left Formula One. And it would definitely be unique. BMW, as far as I'm aware, has never really had much of an association with IndyCar racing, and their American racing presence has actually been quite small. They haven't had a whole lot of programs specifically centered on the United States. Now, certainly stuff like the LMR BMW have raced here, the LMP car, and they have their GTE program, or GTLM as it's known here, program. But we know that is looking like it may go away as early as this year. So there is a void for BMW, and obviously it seems like they want to market in the United States, and they want to do it in motorsports, in a motorsports capacity. So how would BMW enter the sport? Well, let's talk about some of the IndyCar connections, and there are a lot of them. And quite frankly, if you look at it, they have a pretty solid base to go off of in IndyCar racing right now with their current relationships. I just mentioned the GTLM program. BMW is run by Rahal Letterman Lanigan Racing, and I have no reason to expect that BMW is unhappy with Rahal Letterman Lanigan. They just won the Rolex 24. That's the biggest race, or one of the biggest races of the IMSA calendar. So you'd have to imagine that possibly the 1 to 2 car team that Rahal Letterman Lanigan would be willing to go over and start with a BMW motor. That, of course, would put into question Takuma Sato at that team, because almost certainly he would have to leave with the Honda money. But you have to think, Takuma Sato isn't really a spring chicken anymore. If Bobby Rahal was looking to move on to greener pastures, we don't know how much longer Takuma Sato has in his career. So once we get to 2021, that's 2 seasons down the line from now. Who knows what could be happening there? So Rahal Letterman Lanigan's one possible part to that. And then I look to one of Rahal Letterman Lanigan's BMW drivers, who just happens to be in his first year in IndyCar and has been impressive. In fact, he was the fastest BMW driver at the Rolex 24 in his first Rolex 24, and that is Colton Herta, and that is Harding Steinbrenner Racing. I don't think that didn't go unnoticed by the BMW brass, that he was the fastest guy. And I have to imagine that if he continues that kind of performance and continues to perform in IndyCar racing, that they would want to put Colton Herta, assuming that they would come into the sport, they would want him in one of the cars. But, you may say, Harding Steinbrenner Racing just ended up with Honda engines, courtesy of their technical development team, Andretti Autosport. Well, I think Andretti Autosport would move to BMW power in IndyCar racing. Why? Well, guess who runs the BMW Formula E team? Andretti Autosport. Guess who's been winning a whole lot of races for BMW in Formula E? Andretti Autosport. That's a 4-car team. Ray Hall is 1 to 2 cars. Harding Steinbrenner, 1 to 2 cars. You've got right there, 8, 9, 10 cars for the full season already. You look at the Indianapolis 500, the amount of cars that they possibly supply there. You've got, 13, 14, 15, depending on how many they would end up expanding to. That would take care of the commitments that are required from a new manufacturer, and not to mention, you've got 3 solid teams right there with a solid lineup of drivers. Now, there's some question about Alexander Rossi and Takuma Sato. Obviously, Sato would be gone. Possibly Alexander Rossi in that scenario. And a lot of people would probably also say, what about Andretti? Aren't they loyal to Honda? Not really. The last 2 seasons, they've looked at possibly switching to Chevy engines. So to think that they are some sort of a Honda factory team, definitely not. Now, if I would say that maybe Chip Ganassi would move to BMW, then I'd start scratching my head about that, or maybe Aero Schmidt-Peterson moving to BMW. That would make me think, probably not. But Andretti, as they've proven, they are not really interested in playing the manufacturer game. They are willing to go with what gives them the best deal, and I think they would get a lot of testing and development time. Obviously, all the manufacturers would, having pretty much new engines. But I think BMW, if it's true that it is a German manufacturer, they are absolutely far and away position 1 in terms of all their relationships, their positioning in the market, and potentially budget opening up to be able to put together such an IndyCar program. Well, what do you think? What do you think about this mystery German manufacturer coming into IndyCar potentially in 2021? Let me know what you think down in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more IndyCar and motorsport content, and I will see you in the next video.